Every time a feng shui master opens a coffin, he puts soil in his mouth and tastes it. If the flavor is normal, then he dares to ask people to open the coffin. But on this day, Mark seemed to have encountered something that gave him the creeps, because after he tasted the soil near the cemetery, he immediately became grave. When he looked up, he realized there was no name on the bare headstone. So he went up to the grave and looked at it. And all he could see was a series of numbers starting with 3 and 8 in the bottom right corner. Then he stood on the grave and looked at the feng shui. He felt a strong sense of unease. So he asked his employer who had chosen this grave for his grandfather. The employer said that his grandfather was a great contributor to the founding of that era. A high priest chose the feng shui site for him. Since grave robbers were rampant at the time, the monk buried Grandpa in a low key. That's why they didn't put Grandpa's identity on the tombstone. Although the employer's answer was reasonable, but after much hesitation, the worried Mark gave up the deal. This made Mark's companions very anxious. The employer was paying them enough to retire after this job, so they had to make a deal. Mark first calmed down his mixed feelings, and then he said that in his 30 years in the business, he'd never seen a place that was so haunted. He noticed something was wrong as soon as he got to the mountain. The whole mountain is surrounded by a protective fence and has become private property. The mountain was surrounded by a strong yin energy. Then he saw foxes near the cemetery. Since foxes usually use cemeteries as lairs, so the locals think that a place with foxes is even less suitable for a cemetery. In addition, Mark saw that this place is a place of evil spirits, so he concluded that this is the perfect place to keep ghosts. It's not suitable for burying people here. If we force the grave to be broken, we may lose our lives. Although this is a very dangerous move. But Mark's companions were still unwilling to give up this chance to make a fortune, so they returned to the employer to discuss the plan. They also learnt about the employer's difficulties. Ever since his grandfather was buried with a large fortune, strange things have been happening in the family. First, the employer's father was paralyzed in a wheelchair for no reason. Then his brother became mentally ill for no apparent reason. The employer had asked for a feng shui reading, but no one dared to touch his grandfather's grave. Then the family moved abroad. They thought they'd be safe if they stayed away from him, but they weren't out of the woods. His wife had 2 miscarriages without warning. Now she's finally given birth to a son, but the baby cried and cried from the moment he was born. Even the best hospitals in the world can't find the cause. If this goes on, it'll be the end of the line for the employer.